Hi, folks, and welcome back to another episode of the Climate Conundrum Podcast. I am Sanika Divanji, your host and a climate communications and research expert. Today, we're delving into a very interesting topic that is super close to my heart. One of the reasons why I even got into this field of climate change and everything surrounding it. It's also another special milestone episode because it's the 10th episode of this series. I did not think we would make it through here, but we have. And thanks to you all for the support. So, to help unpack all of this in today's episode, I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Barkha Bajaj, who is the founder and clinical director of Unalome, which is her brainchild that brings together psychologists and psychiatrists to provide holistic therapy and wellness to the community through individual, group, and family therapy. Barkha is also the founder and director of UX Foundation, which is an NGO that provides compassionate, comprehensive services to those impacted by gender based violence. I'm very happy to have you here, Barkha. Thanks for joining in.
Thank you for having me.
So, Barkha, today's episode is not usually I talk about um, the external world with the experts, right? What is happening to our climate? What is the physics and the chemistry and the realities of what is going on to the planet? But today, I want to talk about the inner world as we react to all of this that is happening around us. So while I know that climate change is a very niche segment in even the world of psychology and therapy today, so I want to have your focus and your expertise in understanding how to deal with these issues. So yeah,
Sure.
I want to start with the basics, like I always do. Barkha, there are these terms called eco anxiety and climate anxiety and so on and so forth that we hear about often, not often enough, but enough that we all know about these words today. I think I want to start by understanding if at all it is different from generalized anxiety.
Mhm.
Um, and what even do these terms mean?
Sure, Sanika. So basically, if I had to define it, how the American Psychological Association defines it, it is eco anxiety is basically the chronic fear of this whole environmental, almost the volatility of environment, which leads to, and we're getting that because we're observing that their irrevocable impact of climate change, right? So actually, it's a very real response to a real threat,
Mm.
which differs it a little bit from anxiety, because in anxiety, of course, they can be real threat, and they can also be perceived threat. Now, and I think eco anxiety falls somewhere in between, where some people think that we are exaggerating this because this is a perceived threat. It's not really as bad as people think. But as somebody who's passionate about the impact of this, although not an expert by any means in eco anxiety, I do feel like it's a very real response to a very real threat. So that's how I would distinguish it, because this is a real threat.
Absolutely right. I think it's important to distinguish this, and thanks for bringing that up. It can be dismissed, and there are so many studies that are coming up now where, for basically, climate change is not just about rising temperatures or the melting ice caps. It has actually profound implications on mental health. And while this is a big word to use and connect the dots, saying climate change and mental health are directly related, we are seeing that researchers are finding more and more connections on multiple levels that happen. For example, in 2022, Lancet published a study that was done by a few researchers at University of Bath, I think. And what they found was, I think, was very interesting. 59% of young people across 10 countries believe that humanity is doomed due to climate change. Now, you and I come from a different generation where this wasn't a threat growing up. But younger people have more anxiety associated with these topics. And they're also some of the people who are at the forefront of this conversation. Greta Thunberg comes to mind. So many other local youth leaders have come up. So I think I want to know what, in your opinion, could be contributing to these feelings, and how different individuals, different age groups sort of change the approach and the response to this.
Yeah, first, can I just define that, many people interpret anxiety as a pathological response, something that we have to fix or we have to solve, right? Whereas anxiety is actually a very, very constructive emotion. We need it, right? If we didn't feel any anxiety, we would not do that much, because anxiety leads to the fight or flight response or the freeze and fawn response. So, first of all, the understanding of anxiety as something pathological makes this conversation more complicated or more difficult, because then again people want to fix it. Whereas anxiety in the face of climate change is a healthy response, because we are feeling anxiety about climate change. That is why more people have started to research it. So I was just telling you before this conversation that when I went to school, and that was a long, long time ago. When I graduated from my second master's in 2007, this was not even brought up or not part of our coursework or nothing that we ever studied. So the fact that we are studying it, it means it pushes us to do better, to be
Mm.
better, and to also look for solutions, right? Because if, as humanity, if we don't look for solutions, the helplessness of this will consume us. It will make us go into the freeze response, and that's when you'll see depressive symptoms around climate anxiety, or just eco anxiety, where it can become depressive in nature.
Mhm.
So if you allow me, I will try to define three different things for you, and then also tell you which impacts which population more, if that's
This
fine.
sounds perfect. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So obviously there's climate anxiety, and now again I can only speak to my practice. I'm going to be very honest that research wise, I don't think as much research is happening in eco anxiety as should be in the
Mm. Mm.
psychological community. Even when you and I were looking for a specialist who in the mental health field, it was very hard to find one, especially in India, right? So research shows that 18 to 34 age group is definitely more, is thinking about it more, and hence more anxious about it for sure. They're also maybe thinking about it every day. Whereas
Mm.
if you look at, like, say, the post 60s population, they're probably not thinking about this as much. And again, in the room as well, it doesn't come up as much. So what I have definitely noticed, that just eco anxiety, worrying about the future, worrying what will happen. Or I see a lot of couples now, so worrying if they should have children or should not have children, this becoming like this ethical dilemma, is definitely more of that age group for sure. Then there is depression, which I'm like, almost depressive symptoms related to this, where people do feel we are doomed. So since we are already doomed, like, what is there to do? Like, we're almost too helpless in the
Mm.
and a lot of grief or regret, which I see, like, say, 40s 50s, as to what we made this earth into, right? Because now we've already left this for younger people. So I feel age group wise the responses are different. And then of course very real post traumatic symptoms with people who have gone through disasters because of climate change.
Premium and yeah.
If you have seen floods, been in landslides, gone through a drought, obviously your response to this is going to be bigger. It is now a traumatic experience that you're dealing with.
Mm.
So, honestly, the response to climate change will matter in terms of our exposure and experience with it. And then, of course, there's also exposure and experience in terms of what we are reading, what is already happening. Like now, a heat wave is not something we read about, right? People are living through heat wave, people are dying through heat wave. So it's become very real. So again, our responses and which age group is responding how really varies based on their exposure to it.
This is very interesting. Thank you for bringing this up, because I feel um, different age groups, different backgrounds, and your own conditioning to respond to these stressors would also affect. But for example, I have worked in field where farmers in Bihar have known this reality for decades, because they have started facing the implications of climate change way before. One of the reasons why there is so much migration that happens out of these some of these states, right? Jharkhand, Bihar, sometimes even Kerala now has been topping climate disasters one after another since 2008, I think, when the floods happened. And we were discussing earlier, and I think what you brought up about the complex PTSD, right? Climate migration can really lead to a lot of sense of um, being left on your own or having to find a completely new set of places to call your home. Um, have you come across any such examples
Um,
in your work?
so again, I feel like not so much in the higher socioeconomic class, but I do know, like even in terms of people I've hired for either of my organizations, who like a supervisor at the center, they have migrated from rural areas or farming areas because they have gone through these disasters now for many years, right? Where their crops, either the rain comes too soon or it's too much or it comes too late, and whatever crop migration, crop rotation method they were using has stopped working. So it does, like, now again, I don't think they label it as anxiety, or I don't think they label it as a traumatic experience, because again, we label something as trauma when we have more knowledge about trauma. And again, as Indians, we do not like to label things as trauma because our whole culture is based on the whole chalta hai, like you adapt, right? You just adapt to whatever. But the anxiety is very real. The symptoms are very real. The worry is very real. Even for them, right? Like this person that I'm specifically talking about, he constantly worries about his family, and both the brothers have migrated to an urban area because they worry that farming is not going to be able to feed all the mouths that exist back home. So, and this leads to a lot of helplessness, hopelessness, dread. Again, that person might not label it as depression, but helplessness, hopelessness, dread, acute sadness, guilt of leaving home, leaving their
Mm.
parents there and then working here, can all add up to look very depressive. So again, I think it just varies in how much we're going to label it and how we're going to label this, but it is very real, very, very real.
Absolutely. No, you're right. I mean, I was going through some reports while preparing for this episode, and there was a report by the Indian Council of Agricultural Research, and it highlighted that basically 45% of farmers that they surveyed, obviously, in India are experiencing some form of stress, anxiety. And while the study was a qualitative one, so there was more of understanding of what words are being used and how are the farmers that are being surveyed talking about the climate related impact on their lives.
Mhm,
And surprisingly, a lot of people did use the words stress, anxiety,
mhm,
restlessness,
mhm.
feeling of helplessness of what the next monsoon or the next summer will bring about, right? And I am really wondering whether, I mean, this is a general question, not just to you per se, but on a policy level or on a government and community level, we need to figure out how to deal with the marginalized populations, because especially people who are not directly in the system or in urban areas who have the socioeconomic sort of privilege to get into therapy
Mhm,
will deal with this.
mhm.
So I guess one of the questions that I wanted to discuss together would also be, is there an approach that you feel where communities can work together to deal with this?
Absolutely. So, see, I think first of all, we have to understand that mental health itself has not seeped into, or the mental health conversation, right? Maybe medication around mental health, but I also don't know how, I don't have enough information on that. But actual therapy or counseling, say even counseling, right, has not seeped into community mental health, has not seeped into rural areas the way we would have wanted it to,
Mm,
correct? But the fact that we had something, we literally have a term says farmer suicide. We use it like a term, right? Suicide is what? Suicide is a very real mental health issue, correct?
absolutely.
So the fact that that only has not seeped in, so eco-related farmer suicide or eco-related mental health, like I think we're very far from that. But can we have things? Of course, that's how community mental health models work, right? We work in ways that, in fact, I think this has already been done in certain countries in Africa, where they will therapists will train like certain people in a village to
Mm,
recognize depressive or anxiety based things teach them basic CBT techniques, cognitive behavioral therapy, so that this can then translate or go into the community. So we need more stuff like that because of sheer population, right? Because right now, including mine, I cannot lie about that, that Unalom is very niche. We're a boutique mental health center. We're working with obviously people who can afford psychotherapy. I'm not talking psychotherapy, I'm talking like very cognitive based techniques that can at least help us just like mediate this, because um, first we have to recognize it, and that is only not enough. So we are not recognizing enough when somebody is depressed around these issues or anxious around these issues. Second, we have to then take it seriously,
Mm.
because forget rural areas, Sanika, I am almost 100% sure that when this comes up in the room, many therapists don't know what to do with it, right? Or how to address it. I myself, I feel like I've had to educate myself because it started coming up in the room, not because there was education around eco anxiety and then I used that information. It was ulta. Like I had to start, okay, people are talking about this, so let me see what's out there about this. And that way go about it. So,
Mm.
second, we have to take it seriously. And then, third, we have to get into intervention and prevention. Till we don't see this as a serious issue, and I was just telling you before this that there are older generations which refer to the younger generation as doomers. That means they feel they're doomed about everything. So, till we are not even taking this seriously and think that we're just exaggerating this fear, I don't
Mm.
know how we intervene or make community intervention programs or prevention programs around this.
But you're right. It is something that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Even recognizing like farmer suicide, right? P. Sainath talks about this often when he goes reporting on the ground. He's the editor in chief of rural columns in the Hindu, and this comes up often in his talks about how farmer suicide is not just localized problem, but it extends beyond into the mental health space as well. And policymakers need to figure out how to tackle this. And I think a model like what you described in Africa would be very useful. To have community-based interventions to at least train people on ground to recognize certain signs, and then I don't know how much of a intervention can happen, but sometimes if just recognizing that there is an issue could help lead to some space to talk about it.
Absolutely. Because, see, any mental health issue, the first thing is we have to um, look at the loneliness that comes with it. When I am depressed, even though there might be other people going through it, it creates this tunnel vision. I am only looking at me going through this alone.
Hmm.
So I don't have spaces or communities where I can talk about it. If we just even created spaces and communities to talk about it, right? Even in the local medical centers in small villages, if we just had because again, climate anxiety, like any other anxiety, has physical, emotional, psychological, and uh, like your symptoms, right? So even physical symptoms, if they started recognizing of depression, and we could provide the support or safe spaces for people to lean on, which currently do not exist. So I think people, just like with any mental health issue, feel very lonely in this. And that's what community mental health can change, is take away the loneliness and the despair of being alone, going through this alone.
Absolutely. So I relate to this so much because around 2018 was when I started really thinking about everything, right? I was working as a journalist and as a researcher, and more news pieces that came my way, the more anxious I became about what am I doing with my life? What is the future course of action? Whether motherhood is an actual like possibility? Is it morally responsible? All of these questions started churning, and even today, while I don't have an answer to any of those, I think my way of coping with all of this was to say, hey, you know what? Rather than just worrying incessantly, I can actually put and channelize that anxiety into action by doing something about it. Just anything that allows a good night's sleep with a clean conscience. And that is how I got into this field, and I've been working. I feel more younger people are feeling that lately, and that's why there's more youth movements than anything else. Like we all know politicians above a certain age, or scientists, or even um, bureaucrats are not paying attention to this issue as much as we would like it to.
Mhm.
The elections globally this year really proved that as well.
Mm.
Moving on, I think, Barkha, I want to talk about some coping mechanisms, right? Eco anxiety, ecological disaster. These are all sort of like, I'm sure people listening to this are also squirming in their seats and feeling the burden. What is it that we can do? Like, how do we handle this?
Sure. So I think coping, whenever there's anxiety, we also obviously want to look at coping mechanisms and coping techniques. I think the first thing is because of social media, there is information overload. We all also have to see how much information we are exposing ourselves to, because when this is what people have to remember, right? The nervous system will respond the same way if it perceives threat, whether the threat is current and happening in the moment or it is something I imagine,
Hmm.
right? So if I keep reading, again, I'm not a proponent of close your eyes and avoid this conversation or don't see this is happening, but there is a limit. We have to have limits to how much information we are taking
Hmm.
in, because it really can create a lot of issues psychologically to have an overload on any kind of incident. Even when a traumatic thing happens, like even when terror attacks happen, right? We talk to parents about switch off the television. There is a point that children should not be watching this, they should not be exposed to this too much, because the fear and panic becomes very real. So avoid an information overload.
Hmm.
Glimmers are the opposite of triggers. So, just how triggers trigger a stress response, glimmers, finding joy in small things, can actually increase hope. So,
Hmm.
if you're going to expose ourselves to triggers, which is really just something we cannot help right now, we will be triggered. Also, expose yourself to small joys in life or glimmers that give you hope and faith. The second thing is any anxiety leads to fight or flight. So we don't all have to fight. Some of us can fight. The more we join community based uh, programs, advocacy programs, feel like we're doing something about it. Even more kids, I guess, just getting involved and going into this field of study, right? What we
Hmm.
need right now, more researchers, more scientists, more people studying this and studying the impact on mental health and then putting these things together. If we can do that, that will give us a feeling of control. So the thing is, human beings thrive when we feel we have some sense of control, we have some sense of certainty, which climate anxiety has taken away. There is no certainty now, right? The uncertainty itself piques anxiety.
Hmm.
So getting involved in all these things gives us a sense of control and competence over them, which can like help your nervous system feel better because you're doing something about it. Take breaks from climate news, even if you're in the field of climate
Hmm.
research, right? You have to take breaks and be like not exposed to it 24/7, because the feelings of helplessness, uncertainty will further increase anxiety. Now, the thing with anxiety is still here, it helps you, it will propel you in the right direction. Anxiety that peaks beyond that will lead to freeze response. So fight or flight
Hmm.
can become freeze, where I feel absolutely helpless. I feel I can't do anything about this. And we want to prevent the freeze response. We want to prevent that we are also demoralized and demotivated, that we just all put our hands up and say, okay, I'm too exhausted and I don't want to. And I hear that a lot now with younger people. I
The
don't watch the
despair.
show. I just don't want to know. I don't want to know. Yeah, this despair. And it worries me, because I feel let's use this anxiety to propel ourselves. Otherwise, we'll all just be in despair. And collective despair is never, never a good idea. Practice compassion for self and others, because I feel also, just like everything, Sanika, we are polarized. We are constantly polarized, right? So if your parents don't understand climate anxiety, what we want to do is have more constructive conversations, not
Hmm.
get angry or upset and shut down conversation, right? Or you won't understand, or you don't care. Maybe they do, but they don't understand the gravity of it, or they've not read enough research on it. So when people have ideas that are different from us, or even worries that are different from us, I think just, and this is literally, you can pick this in any topic, politics, religion, anything. We need to have constructive dialogue. Great things come out of constructive dialogue, which means I will have to listen to the other side. If I have already made up my mind that I'm on a moral high ground and you're on the low ground, I am not going to have that conversation with you. And I think that's what the younger generation really needs to change.
Hmm.
If you're just going to talk within your bubbles, it's not going to bring real change. You want to bring real change, learn to listen to different ideas that are separate from you. But we are so easily offended and so easily upset, we don't do that enough. So I really believe that. Some amount of radical acceptance. Radical acceptance is basically also seeing things how they are currently, right?
Mm.
Because what anxiety does is anxiety either takes us into a past or a future. The here and now gets lost. What is really happening? But what can we really take action on? The here and now. Correct? I can't take action on something that will happen in the future. I can't take action on something that's happened in the past. That, oh, my grandparents didn't do this enough and they didn't leave us a good enough world. Yes, true. But either we can start living there or we can be in the here and now and really do something about it. And um, as a community, I think when somebody brings up angst or anxiety or even says, hey, I'm so depressed about this, we just need to take it a little more seriously. Like, I don't think just people are just saying this, right? I think this truly worries people. And I read this research in the morning, because maybe now that I'm researching this, I'm getting all the articles around it, that the UNICEF recently did a research that by 2050, all children will be exposed to heat strokes. It might become a regular thing. That's a tough childhood. What you're saying is how we grow up playing outside and running outside. That might not be a reality for our children. So if that doesn't make you anxious at all, I worry about that as well. Maybe a little bit of anxiety is important around this. So we make changes now.
I love all of these recommendations. I also see a lot of it as useful to my present reality because working in this field, being exposed to these news, and then my algorithms get tailored to these specific news as well, it really feels like a doomsday world
Situation.
out there. And I have to really take conscious decisions to cut it off sometimes. Um, yeah, I mean, it is helpful to channelize anxiety to a certain extent. The rest of it, we just let go and focus on what we can do. What it brings to my mind is also the irony that ecological disasters and ecological challenges are creating all of this. But one of the best solutions that has worked for me is again immersing myself in the nature and going back to forests and seeing some waterfalls, getting immersing myself with the natural elements. This really is as therapeutic as anything else too. So perhaps that is another community-based thing we can all start doing where we take nature seriously, start actively pursuing the outdoors and getting out there as much as we can. Also, I think I do that because there's that certain fear at the back of my mind that maybe this is not going to exist in the next decade or 2 decades. Maybe all these beautiful forests and the Himalayas are melting. So maybe we should make the most of it right now. And if more and more people go outdoors, they realize the value of all of these beautiful resources that we have and start actively conserving it.
Absolutely, and we know that nature has a therapeutic impact on the nervous system, right? It actually regulates the nervous system. So the nervous system either upregulates or downregulates. So if
Mhm.
we're upregulated, we'll feel palpitations, anxiety, and this is all related again to the gut and brain. And if we're down regulated, we feel lethargic and just not wanting to do anything and very freeze like response. We know that nature regulates both, right? It can help us upregulate and downregulate to regulate our nervous system. So absolutely, I 100% agree with that. And I think, again, then when we go out in nature, we need to take care of it like we take care of our homes, right? Because I think when we go, especially like when people go in big groups of treks and this and that, then also how what we leave behind there is really important. And we don't need to leave anything behind there except just give nature back what it's giving us. That's my bigger
Leave no
concern.
trace.
That, yeah, like Indians are traveling more than ever, but are Indians being mindful about how we leave spaces that we travel in? I'm not always sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, this is definitely an issue that we should introspect about as a community. There was an interesting term that I found while doing, again, the research for this episode, and it really hit bullseye for me. In 2005, there's a philosopher called Glenn Albrecht, and he coined a new term called solastalgia. Now, hear me out, right? It describes the homesickness that you have when you are still at home, but you notice that your home and the planet is changing in irreversible ways, which obviously makes you feel distressed. So it's related to the word nostalgia, but in the other sense where you realize that Earth is never going to be the same again if we continue doing what we're doing. So I think the feeling of being overwhelmed by the enormity of climate change and its impact is what many people are facing today. And when I was speaking to a couple of friends and some other people about the episode I'm doing today, every single person told me, "Oh, this I will listen to for sure." Because I feel everyone is in that mental space where they want to know what to do about this, the heavy burden that we're all carrying. And like you said, right, media is not helping either. Sometimes there are a lot of these really alarming headlines, but they leave you with it, and there is no way to know what to do about it now. So, what strategies would you say can we do as an individual? We spoke about community, we spoke about things that we can do, but are there any mindfulness techniques? Are there any, like, your usual therapeutic methods to stop it here and now?
For sure. So first you have to recognize what's happening with your nervous system. So again, I worry when, like, people say, hey, meditate, and meditation is given as like a self-help tool for everybody. When somebody's anxiety is very, very high, meditation may not help. I might not be able to, like, in fact, when I'm meditating, all the thoughts might overwhelm me. So you
Mm.
also have to see what happens with your nervous system. Now, if you're somebody who gets upregulated faster, that means that when you're dysregulated, you get a lot of palpitations, anxiety like symptoms. Then you want to always do techniques that downregulate you. So for example, grounding. And funnily enough, for grounding, we many times use nature, like walking on grass but with your feet actually touching the ground. There are other grounding techniques, like I don't know if you know the five senses grounding technique, but maybe we can put that in, like, in the when you release it, we can put some of these techniques
Yeah,
there.
definitely. I'll add these resources.
Progressive muscle relaxation. So, generally, when human beings are stressed, we tend to clench our muscles, and sometimes even unknowingly. And I'm hearing this more and more, where people will say they're having issues with their jaw, they feel they're clenched a lot. Stuff like that can really help. Um, Even just floating in the swimming pool, right? Like just floating. So not swimming or making it a swimming based thing, but actually just floating. It relaxes us. Of course, any mindfulness stuff is also excellent. If we are very down regulated, like that means we are not able to do anything and not able to get out of bed, then we need more upregulation skills. So upregulation skills are, for example, surya namaskars. They really help, right, with upregulation. Or even uh, high intensity training. Now again, when somebody is very depressed or has high intensity, like, the high intensity training is not something they might be able to do. So for example, when you're trying to down regulate, is this making sense?
Yes, absolutely. So let me try and see if I understood what you're saying, right? To down regulate, you want your heart rate, for example, to come down and use grounding strategies, use things that calm you down, calm your nervous system down. And upregulation is when you're in that
Yeah.
apathetic, lethargic state of mind. You want to actually give yourself that little push to do more.
Correct. So, suppose you're not even able to get out of bed, right? Then you do longer inhales. So, when we tell somebody to upregulate, we say longer inhales, whereas when we're telling somebody to downregulate, we do longer exhales. So, even how we breathe will calm the nervous system, right? So, also creating heat in your body can help us upregulate, and listening to high beat music. Whereas restorative yoga poses, again, anybody can Google it, restorative yoga poses will help you down regulate, and listening to soothing music will
Mm.
down regulate. So, yeah, based on where your nervous system and what happens more often with you, I would definitely say your regulation techniques should match how your nervous system presents itself.
Thank you. This is very helpful. Absolutely. Earlier, you mentioned about how younger, the youth, children, kids, toddlers, are facing distress a lot more than older populations. And it's obvious, right? It's their future that is being robbed in some way. Um, I also wanted to address, because you have worked in a school for a long time and you have worked with children before. So there is an attempt being made to have climate education in school so that kids are aware of what is happening. For example, Finland has a great system where they've introduced integrated curriculum on climate change, mental health, anxiety related to climate change, so that kids have a vocabulary and
Mhm.
an understanding to express what they're feeling with the changing climate. Because they are aware of what's happening. They know that it did not snow this year, or um, we keep talking about carbon emissions and things. So I think the awareness exists. They just need more understanding of what to do with this. What do you think this is feasible in India? Do you see any hope?
Absolutely. Like we didn't think like LGBT education would be feasible in India at one point, or I really struggled to bring in sex education in India. So if we could bring all those pieces for sure. But like you said earlier, we can't just leave children with this information, but not enough stuff to do.
Hmm.
That creates a helplessness. Now again, if little children are exposed to all this, but we don't break this into even little things that they can do, then
Hmm.
the helplessness will lead to more anxiety. So we want, if we are bringing this into curriculums, you also want to bring it with uh, or join it with aspects of how kids can bring in change. And I do think that either ways, at least the school I taught in, my younger ones, even like this was literally, I left the school in 2017 and I worked there for 8 years. They were already aware and already like, we had clubs like environment club and things like that. In fact, they were the little our toddlers had a little kitchen garden where they would grow their own food, so that they learned early how to take care of plants and take care of things. So I think, yes, definitely let's make them aware without overwhelming them, and giving them channels and areas that they can then use this information. No, because if they have all this information but nothing to do with it, you'll see a surge in anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is probably true for also the parents who are listening to this, right? If your kids ask about these issues, um, as Barkha says, don't leave them just with the information, but also channelize ways in which action can be
Mhm.
oriented towards some positive aspects, I guess.
Absolutely.
I think this has been a very insightful conversation and very needed as well for me personally too, because I think I've faced this. This was my start into the field, and this has been a regular feature in my everyday professional journey as well. But before we wrap up, I usually ask this question to everyone who comes on in the series. What is it that you think gives you hope? Is there any policy related measure? Now, I know you're not from the background, but from your own expertise, do you see any strategies that could help?
I think people give me hope, but maybe because that's what I do literally is work with people every day. So I think my hope also I derive from people, because I see more and more, especially my students, getting involved in different ways with climate, or with just so like, I think we've raised, which is wonderful, that I see more advocacy now than I've ever seen before.
Mm.
Even though when I was in college and stuff, I wouldn't say that there was a lack of advocacy, but it was not at the rate. In fact, I feel now children pick like one thing that really matters to them, and really, like, it's like a dog with a bone, which is great. I think we need that, right? So I think people give me hope mostly. Definitely young people give me hope in terms of how action oriented they are, and how much social media has made it easier for us to take action. So we
Yeah.
can also decide, know how we use social media. We can either use it to overwhelm ourselves, or we can use it for action. And I think the fact that lot of younger people are using it for actionables is just very heartening. And I just think that older people in their lives, instead of seeing it as a waste of time or waste of this, should see it as something that they're doing for the larger world and not themselves, because I think that's what needs to happen more. We
It could
just
become a great resource if you use it that way.
exactly. So when we raise children to just be individualistic and only focus on their needs and their wants, I don't know if we're creating a better world. But when we raise children to look outwards and see, get perspective, see what's happening with different people. So there was a student I had in the school that I worked in, who was so moved by the workers in Dubai. He studied in Dubai just before he came to India, and the heat that he worked that they worked in, because the heat in Dubai and all touches 50 plus. He did drives to just give them water and apples. Like, he just raised money to go across construction sites in Dubai. He didn't need to do this. So I think that if you're moved enough and you just make change, you just affect one more life or an environment in the smallest way, of course it can make change. Like, that's what we know. We can bring this whole thing together, down together, or we can really lift up this whole world together. Because I feel like, and I might be rambling at this point, but if somebody said your house is under attack, we would totally understand why a person living in that house would be scared, right? That if the house was under attack, human beings thrive in safe spaces.
Mm.
But why are we not seeing this? This is the same thing at a larger scale.
Yeah.
So if we just see that, yes, people can't feel safe if the environment is not safe, uh, we might take it a little more seriously, which is my hope.
This was very, very, very useful and interesting. And while we cannot cover all the nuances under this topic, I think we did our best to try and include most of the topics that we have discussed so far. So thank you so much, Barkha. This was amazing. I'm going to link down some of the resources that you talked about, also some things that are being discussed on a global scale related to climate action, mental health, and any resources that can be useful if you are feeling distressed about what is happening to our planet. But stay tuned for the next episode, and yeah, we will continue this discussion.